My name is Andrea and I have my colleague Patrick Delorme here in the room.
Good morning, everyone.
And we also have the incredibly talented Marie-Claude doing tech and support for us today as well.
Good morning.
So we're really excited to have so many of you join us today on the call. I wanted to let you know right off the bat that you can use the chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen throughout the webinar to ask questions, to make comments, to share resources. And I also wanted to let you know, because I know that you'll ask, that the PowerPoint slides will be available along with a recording of this webinar on our website probably tomorrow. And later today, we will be posting a blog post, and there will be a webinar recap that will go out later in the week as well. So you will be able to take advantage of all of the resources and materials that we're going to talk about today. Also, Patrick and I are going to be writing a resource based on today's webinar, probably throughout the summer. So it's great to see so many people introducing themselves via the chat box. It looks like there's at least one person that can't hear us. So Marie-Claude, if you could let Diego know that maybe he's got his speakers muted. Great. So I wanted to start off by just telling you a little bit about myself and why I, as an Anglophone, am so passionate about French language services. And I actually grew up outside of Montreal and went to French immersion school and moved to Ontario when I was 12, where I promptly forgot all of the French that I had ever learned and actually struggled quite a bit through high school. And just a few years ago, when I was starting to do some work with HC Link, I got really inspired through working with a group of health promotion professionals who are working in French language services to try to study and regain my French skills. And it certainly is an ongoing process. I've been studying French again for about 5 years, of course, making a very typical mistake, I think, when folks are learning another language as an adult, thinking, oh, in a year I'll be bilingual, and I'm still struggling along. But one of the reasons that I wanted to talk a little bit about that is that what this experience has really given me a lot of empathy for is for folks who are trying to express themselves in a language that is not their mother tongue. I'm an extremely articulate person, if you haven't already guessed. I love to talk. And one of the things I find most frustrating is when I know exactly what it is that I want to say, but I don't know the words in French. And one day I started thinking about this and wondering, you know, what is it like for folks for whom English is not their first language? It's frustrating just on a regular daily basis trying to navigate, life in the city, in the town, in the province of Ontario. But what happens if you get sick? What happens if you need mental health services? What happens if you're just trying to access information to allow you and your family and your community to make healthier choices, and English is not your first language? So my empathy for that situation has really inspired me not only to continue learning French, but also to support those who are trying to build their own capacity and trying to deliver French language services. So that's a bit about me, and now Patrick is going to introduce himself.
Yeah. Unlike Andrea, I am a Francophone. My mother tongue is French, and you can hear it in my accent when I talk. But I have an experience to share with you. In 2010, I went to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. At this time, I was working for an international organization. When I arrived there, as you can see, I was getting by the delegation. But what happened at this time, they didn't speak French, they didn't speak English, and I can't barely understand what they were saying to me. I was so confused, so frustrated. But fortunately, they were waiting for an interpreter. So the other day, the day after, you can see, I was an happier guy because there were an interpreter. I can understand what they were saying in the meeting. So since then, I was saying, no, linguistic barrier it's really a big issue. When we can understand each other, that could be a unquote thing to have. So when I can tell you, I live firsthand how it could be confusing. It could be frustrating to don't speak a language. So when I came in Canada, I decided to advocate and work for people in minority contexts, especially for French language speaking person.
Right.
Andrea.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the questions that we get all of the time is why is it that we should be offering services in French? And for one thing, the French Language Services Act guarantees that Francophones have access to health services in their own language. Many organizations are mandated to deliver services in French. But if we think from a healthy communities perspective, we see that as language and culture are determinants of health, if what we're really trying to do is build the health of our communities, we have to really include everyone in that definition of who is in our community. And that includes grounding everything we do in the social determinants of health, which includes language and culture. And we also know that when clients receive services in their own language, they follow advice and instructions more closely. And that's pretty easy to understand when it comes to things like prescriptions and taking medications. But I think for those of us in health promotion, it's a really important message as well when we're trying to give the folks in our community advice and empower them to make healthy choices. They need to actually understand what that information actually is. And there are also benefits to you in providing French language services, and that is that you can offer higher quality services when you can offer them in the mother tongue of those that you are serving. You can better understand the needs of Francophones in your community, you can increase your reach, you can develop closer links to Francophones, and all of this helps you move towards equity. So one of the things that we find, because we at HC Link have been doing this work in building French language services capacity for quite some time, is that we've got an awful lot of information out there. And you'll see in the files download box in the middle right-hand box on your screen, there's a brand new resource that basically captures all of the resources that we've developed at HC Link on this topic. But what we kept hearing from folks is that, okay, I've been to all these webinars and I've read all your resources and they're really awesome, but when it's Monday morning and I'm at my desk and I need to start actually working towards delivering services in French, I don't really know what to do. So what we wanted to do with this webinar is really develop some content that was going to help you actually get started. So what are some of the things that you need to know right off of the bat? Including the history and the context of Francophones in Ontario. It's really important to understand where folks are at and where they're coming from when you're starting to do this work. Really important to be able to identify who your audience is and what their needs are, and then we're going to go through some basic components to developing a French language services plan. We also do invite you to keep using the chat box to ask your questions, make your comments, share your resources, and at the end of the session, we also have Tammy Schubat from OFIA who is going to come and share some of her and OFIA's experiences in delivering French language services, and we'll have lots of time for questions as well. So that is our plan for today. So I wanted to let you know where we got a lot of the material for today's webinar. And these are two resources, one that was developed by Health Nexus, which is a member of HC Link, and Reflet Salveo last year, and one from RIFSO. And both of these resources, they're both available in English and in French, and they're very handy. Marie-Claude has posted the links for those resources in the chat box. And like I mentioned, we've got a brand new resource just launched today. It was just posted on our website earlier this morning, and it basically gives a listing of all of the resources we've developed and delivered on French language services capacity building. And then also the other resource, Work Together with Francophones in Ontario, we actually developed quite a few years ago before we were actually called HC Link, back in the days when we were called the Healthy Communities Consortium. And that resource, available in English and French, has a lot of the information that we continue to draw on in all of these resources. So we wanted to start off, now that you know a little bit about us and why we're here and what we want to share with you today, we wanted to find out a little bit about you. So we're putting up a poll, and we would love for you to tell us the level of French services that your organization currently gives. And then we've also got an open-ended question for you. Why does your organization want to, or perhaps have to, deliver services in French? So what are some of your motivations? We're going to give you a few minutes to answer those couple of questions. Right, so we've got some answers coming up in the chat box now. So lots of you actually work with or want to work with Francophones that are in your community. And I saw earlier in the chat box that Marcia from Thunder Bay, that they are really starting to look at how they can deliver French language services a little bit more. So that's really exciting to have you here today, Marcia, but also to have you doing that work. And of course, legislation plays a really huge role often in folks wanting to and needing to deliver French language services. The great response from DAO. DAO, I hope I'm saying your name properly. We realized the need for it and went ahead with that mandate. That's really, really great, great sentence. Fantastic. So we'll just let everyone else time. Looks like we've got lots of folks typing, so we'll just give another moment or two. Hear what people's motivations are. Fabulous. So lots of folks saying that they're in designated bilingual communities, that there's legislation that basically mandates them to deliver French and services in French, but also lots of folks that recognize a higher quality of service, that it's a social responsibility to provide services in French. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. And the poll, it's 50%. Say that they offer some service in French and would like to do more.
Of course, we didn't give them the option
yeah.
of wanting to do more or not, but we're making an assumption since everyone's on the phone that they want to do more. Great. To dive into for today's webinar. So as I mentioned, we've got three sort of big buckets of information today. And the first one is to really go over some of the context and history. And I just wanted to mention, this is a fantastic website. Actually, Marie-Claude just told me about this website last week, Ontario 400. It was developed for the 400th anniversary of Francophones in Ontario. And this is beautiful artwork from their webpage, but also they've got really great history and timeline and all sorts of really cool resources, so I would encourage you to check it out. So we wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the history. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do that is that it is really important when you're working with any particular population group to do your homework. Especially if you are not a member of the Francophone community, it's important to show that you're trying to understand the context of Francophones in Ontario, what the history is, where the Francophones are located, the history of your own organization and working with Francophones. And the first step is really to understand the communities that you want to serve and the context that they're operating in. So we wanted to go over a little bit of history, not only because as a society we need to know our own history, but because it really influences the Francophone culture in Ontario and the ways that Francophones see themselves as a minority. So this year in 2015, we're celebrating the 400th anniversary of the Francophone presence in Ontario. And in 1615, French explorers were the first Europeans to set foot in what is now called Ontario. 150 years later, France ceded its North American colonies to England, and under the British regime, Francophones continued to participate in the economic and social development of what was then Upper Canada. After the Upper and Lower Canada rebellions of 1837, there was a report, the Durham Report, recommended that French Canadians be assimilated and that the English language dominate Canada. And as a result of that, and going forward in history, there were a number of crises where Francophones attempted to resist. For example, there was Ruling 17 in 1912, which imposed English as the only language to be taught in public school. And as recently as 1997, when the only Francophone university hospital center in Ontario was supposed to be closed. So these events have led to a Francophone community that's very resilient, very organized, and able to defend the rights and culture of Francophones and to preserve their language and culture. In the 1980s, the Ontario government at the time created legislation to define the rights of Francophones. The Courts of Justice Act in 1984 confirmed French as an official language in the court system, and the French Language Services Act in 1986 grants legal status to Francophones and guarantees the public the right to receive government services in French. And the Local Health System Integration Act was brought into play in 2011 and is also a part of that history. So just a few years ago, part of the work to really bring French language services to the province is the Ontario government adopted a new and a more broad definition of Francophone. And they wanted to do that in order to reflect the reality and the diversity of Francophone communities in Ontario, really recognizing that some folks, their mother tongue is neither English nor French, but they do speak one of those official languages. So the new definition of Francophone really takes into consideration folks whose mother's tongue is not French, but is their working language here in this country. So in 2013, with the adoption of Bill 106, the French Language Services Commissioner became an office of the legislature. So François Boileau is like the Auditor General, the Ombudsman of Ontario, the Chief Medical Officer of Health in Ontario. He's responsible for conducting independent investigations under the French Language Services Act in response to complaints or on his own initiative. And he also monitors the progress made by government agency in delivering services in French in Ontario. And we've been very fortunate to have a really close working relationship with François Boileau, and he actually was a keynote speaker at our last conference a couple of years ago. And we've got some great videos of him up on our website. So I know that history can sometimes seem like a little bit of a boring thing, but as I was going through all of that background, I thought, wow, those were a few things that I either didn't know or I've forgotten. So I'd encourage you to visit that Ontario 400 website to get a little bit more of the taste for what's actually been happening in our own province. So moving forward into the present, I thought it would be good to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the demographics of Francophones in Ontario. And a lot of folks ask, what is the population percentage of Francophones in this province? And it's just under 5% at 611,500 individuals across the province, and that is using the new definition of Francophone. And of course, there is a different dispersion of we have a graphic that's not showing. I had a really pretty pie chart, so I'm going to have you use your imagination to imagine that there's a very high percentage of Franco-Ontarians in the east, 42% in the eastern part of the province, 40% in the central part of the province, 20% in the northeast, and a much lower percentage in the southwest, 5.7%, and just over 1% in the northwest. I'm sorry, my pretty pie chart is not showing there. It's also really important to think about in counties and catchment areas with cities that there are some urban Francophone populations. So 1 in 4 Francophones live in Ottawa, and 1 in 10 Franco-Ontarians live in Toronto. That it's also really important to to know that the reality in Northern Ontario is really different from what a lot of Francophones are experiencing in rural areas or more urban areas. Also wanted to let you know that the Franco-Ontarian population is older than the average population in Ontario. The average age of Franco-Ontarians is 44 versus 40 in the rest of the province. 20% of the Franco-Ontarian population is over the age of 45, and that is especially true in the northern part of the province. And women make up just over half, 53% of the Franco-Ontarian population. So one other thing I found really interesting as an Anglophone doing some of this research is how often French is spoken at home. So 54% of Franco-Ontarians do speak French at home, but again, that really varies across the province. It's very high, 80% in northeastern Ontario and 84% in eastern Ontario, and lower in some of the other areas in the province. So one of the things that I think that this really demonstrates is that there really is no one Francophone community across the province, but the local contexts are really different and the local histories are really different. And it's really important for you to not only understand the history of what's happened in the country and the province and the Francophone statistics across the province, but really what's going on in your own community, because that is a little bit different. And part of that is that it's often easy for folks, especially Anglophones like me, to think of French as just a language. But it's actually more than that. It's part of culture. There can be religious significances. There can be social determinants of health. And just as with many populations that we work with, there is no one Francophone community. Since the very beginning, immigration and migration have played a fundamental role in Francophone communities in Ontario. Today, Franco-Ontarians come from more than 30 different countries where French is spoken, across Europe, across Africa and Caribbean countries, the Middle East and Asia. To that end, there is no one Francophone community, but it's a true mosaic in Canadian style of communities from different communities, cultures, religions, and traditions. Even if they share the same common language, Francophones do come from all over the world. So another really important reason to understand not only where the Francophones in your community are, but where they come from and what are the histories and contexts and cultures and backgrounds that they're operating from. So another really important part of history to think about is the history of your organization in working with local Francophone communities. So if you're just beginning this work in your community with your organization, it's really important to dig into some of that history and find out, has your organization ever tried to engage the Francophone community before? How did it go? What went well? What didn't? What did you learn? What would you do differently next time? And similarly, in partnering with Francophone organizations, did you try that? How did it work? What were some of the barriers? What were some of the successes? And lots of us, I think, have experienced situations where we've tried, we think we've tried, we have tried to offer French language services, and there wasn't very good uptake. So really important to understand what went well, what didn't, and what did you learn. And in part that is because the Francophone community, like all sorts of human people on our little planet here, have some distrust and negative past experiences that they may be carrying forward with them. And difficulties involved in advocacy and awareness-raising activities sometimes result in poor quality of services that didn't really meet the needs of Francophones in the community. So there might be resulting feelings of distrust towards the service provider, hesitation to getting involved once again. And there's also a temptation with Francophone communities, like many minority groups or minority populations, they can often be really over-consulted with the perception of, you're always asking me what I think, but I don't ever really see anything happening as a result of what I've told you. So really important to dig into the history of your organization in your community with Francophone communities. So the Francophone community in Ontario is a linguistic minority in the broader society of our province and our country. And this minority situation influences how this community perceives life and experiences health. And many of the concepts that we're going to explore in the next couple of slides, they apply to minority groups. Today we're focusing on Francophones, but you could certainly apply a lot of these concepts to some of the other language populations that you're working with. And I really want to say that we want to really emphasize that these behaviors are unintentional. And it's important to mention as they often run beneath the surface and they can affect relationships with Francophone communities, but we certainly don't want to be blaming folks or making folks feel guilty with the next few concepts that we're going to talk about. It's really just about being aware of some of the history and context. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of a difficult topic, and it's called symbolic violence. And this theory was first described in the 1970s by Pierre Bourdieu and Jenna-Claude Passeron. And this theory really explains the power relationship between dominant and minority groups. And in this context, we're talking about Francophones in the broader Anglophone context of Ontario, but you can apply this to any minority group. And symbolic violence is described as actions by the dominant group to force the linguistic minority to speak the dominant language. And the purpose of that, and again, it's often unintentional and systemic, it's important to note that that is really about trying to maintain some kind of order. And there are some examples of some phrases that you might hear that actually manifest symbolic violence that are really more about the tone of voice and the attitude. It's really not always so much about the words as it is about the tone. And these are just a few examples of some expressions that Francophones might often hear that actually can result in creating some insecurity and some anxiety. And in some cases, symbolic violence can even lead to people stopping to speak their own language as they try to assimilate themselves into the majority society. And externalized oppression is an important one to think about from a service provider perspective, and it's the unjustified exercise of authority and power of one group over another. And I think we see this playing out in our province and our country over and over again. I think in particular with the Truth and Reconciliation report coming out within the last couple of weeks, and can often be applied to other population groups in our province and in our country. And often external oppression includes imposing the beliefs, values, and lifestyles of one group on another group. And over time, externalized oppression can actually become internalized, where in this case, Francophones believe and act like the beliefs, values, and lifestyles of Anglophones are the only reality. Internalized oppression is often defined as self-hate or internalized racism, and it can actually have some fairly serious manifestations. Folks can start to feel real discomfort with their identity as a Francophone. They can not want to belong to the community anymore. They fear that if they try to get services in French, they're not going to get any services, and so maybe it's better to just get English services because at least I have those. Often there's a fear of being perceived as a whiner, or someone complains or is constantly asking for services in French. And a fear that no one will listen to you if you speak French, a belief that you must speak English in order to be understood and included. And there's often a belief that English services are better, or that are higher quality services than in French. And again, it's really important here to say that a lot of these beliefs are actually subconscious. They might not actually be conscious thoughts, but they can be subconscious ones that actually can affect the way that folks think and act and what they believe in the community. And so a few other concepts we thought were really important to talk about when we're talking about working with Francophones. One is the notion of dispersion, and we're going to talk about that again in a minute, but Francophone populations make up a relatively small percentage of the population. For instance, for Marcia up in Thunder Bay, it's about 3% of the population. And the result of that, it can be difficult for Francophones to be identified and to be taken seriously and to motivate service providers to consider their needs. I think in particular with communities that are getting a lot of immigration and a lot of new Canadians from other parts of the world, sometimes those populations can make up a greater percentage than the Francophone population. Just a reminder, too, as I mentioned earlier, that language and culture are determinants of health. And as I said before, people who do receive services in their own language are better able to follow instructions and advice, have less need for hospital services, and remain in better overall health. They also have a stronger sense of community belonging, which is another determinant of health. Um, Minority status can have an impact on a sense of belonging in the community. And as I mentioned, Francophones are more likely to state that their sense of belonging is not as strong when compared to Anglophones. And there are lots of Franco-Ontarians that also might be experiencing a double minority status. So for instance, if someone is from the disabled community and also Francophone, if someone is from the LGBTQ community and also Francophone, it's going to be difficult for them to access services because of one minority status, and when you combine a second one, add a second one on top, that can make it even more challenging. So as I mentioned, these are kind of tricky topics. And again, we don't want to get into blaming or laying guilt or anything like that. Really, this is just food for thought. One of my favorite pieces of art, The Thinker here. Really something for you to think about and understand when you're going out and working with Francophone communities, that these may be some of the things that are sort of percolating under the surface of the work that you are doing in community.
So I think, Andrea, we need the rest.
Okay.
Yeah, let me go over the rest for you.
Okay.
Because now we understand the context. We have a bit of story of the Francophone in Ontario. Let's go to be more practical.
Right.
Your audience and their needs. What question do we need to ask? Francophone, they Francophone tend to be dispersed. Andrea said that earlier. Generally speaking, there isn't a community such, such as a neighborhood or a district where one can find Francophone. They are so dispersed. But there are places where Francophone gather, like Francophone schools, daycare, churches, place of worship. There are also friend associations. And there are also Francophone media, such as TV, radio, newspaper, newsletters, and you can also work with partners. You can identify a Francophone organization, network in your community may have a distant relationship with Francophone community that can help you to bridge with Francophone. For an Anglophone or bilingual organization, partnership with Francophone organization is key, and the institution representing them can turn out to be a key successfully setting up service in French. This partnership will develop greater visibility in your community, increase demand for services in French, and build relationship and trust. For Francophone, this partnership can lead to better access to quality services that are relevant to the needs and priorities and are appreciated because they have contributed to their planning and implementation. Trust is important to have good relationship with Francophone and any other community. You need to identify the need. Where? How? Go to existing data first, like census data, the lean report, the entity report. Connect with your local health planning entities, the réseau, the health unit, etc. Identify gaps. What don't you know? What do you want to know that you need to know? What you don't know that you need to know? Conduct additional need assessment if needed. So, but be careful. Beware over consulting because the Confederation complain that there is too many consultations. We need to also to prioritize need. I like this expression from Gandhi. Action expresses priorities. Priorities, if your research needs assessment, identify a lot of priorities for local Francophone community you may need to prioritize. Engage local Francophone communities group in prioritizing if at all possible. Partners at the very least from the beginning. Consider quick win balance with longer term strategies. Low no cost balance with blue sky thinking, building, expanding on existing initiatives are key. So don't 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 think that you can do all the what you see. Prioritize. Remember that the action that you take identify what your priorities are and send a very strong message to the community. So, could you see the what we just posted here? What barrier have your organization, you or your organization, experienced in offering FLS? You can use the chat box to try to answer to this question. Yeah, some answer, lack of staff who speak French, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the number one answer.
The number one answer, yeah, the number one answer, yeah. The capacity to advance into the French language resources, lack of French resources, yeah, lack of qualified early childhood educators who speak French. FLS is not placed up front. Yeah, that's a big one too.
Yeah, it's often in job postings, you'll see a tiny little sentence at the very bottom.
Exactly.
Bilingualism an asset.
Yeah. So no funding, no knowledge of where to get support and resources, cost of translations.
Yeah, and Sarah from the Physical Activity Resource Center has a really great point that oftentimes when we're seeking funding, if we get a grant to develop a program or deliver services, they often don't account for the additional time that we need to translate and adapt and review those resources. And of course, there's additional costs required too, as Natasha mentioned, the cost of translation.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is we're going to go on to talk about a lot of those barriers.
Exactly.
So.
We are going to talk about those barriers, and thank you for people who post some barrier. Yeah, trying to reach. Jeanette Bailey say trying to reach the Francophone community with limited resources, and the community is tired of this money. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. My position is designated as FLS, but we need more French language speakers. Yeah, definitely. Okay, good. Now we have some barrier from you. Let's go further to be more practical. How to develop your FLS plan. So I have 3 advice to you today. The first one, keep it simple. Keep it really simple. You know what I said earlier about prioritizing. So after you have done your homework, now keep it simple. And the second advice that I have to you, be realistic. We identify you said you wrote a lot of barrier earlier. So be realistic. Do what you can do. And the last advice is plan wisely. And we will show you how to keep it simple, to be realistic, and to plan wisely. So now that you have the context and you know how to plan, to be realistic and to be wisely. Your plan should include all aspects of your work. So, plan should include aspects of carried out by staff and other members of your organization, like governance, communications, human resources, and like any plan and evaluation. Your community partners can also contribute in various ways, especially if you refer clients to other service providers or if you work with clients who have been referred to you. Partner with other organizations. Have formal agreement. We have a good example in Toronto, the Centre Francophone de Toronto partner with two other organizations, the CMHA and Toronto North Support Service. Those three organizations, the only safety is the Francophone organization. But because of this partnership, through Passage is the name of the program, they can offer mental health support service to the client who are either Francophone or bilingual or Anglophone. So partner. Be familiar as well with other French resources in the community to refer clients to. So now we are going through all of this. Governance. Ensure that Francophones are present in the decision-making process and that the board is committed to delivering FLS. That's a key point. This may include, but not limited to, Francophone representation on the board of direction. It identifies champions to push plan to embed in accountability measure. Some organizations reserve position on the board some position can be reserved only for Francophone. For example, the Children Head Society in Sudbury and Malitoline have done so. The Ottawa Children Treatment Center and Health Nexus have Francophone in their board of directors. It's important that Francophones who sit on the board of directors reflect the surrounding Francophone community. As Andrea mentioned earlier, the Francophones are so diverse. So, as well as provide the necessary expertise in helping the organization. We should also have Francophone French language service planning committee in your organization if possible. It's also a way to include Francophone voice in your organization. Include Francophone bilingual staff and non-French speaking staff gives them opportunity to build capacity and to improve understanding. It's also important to include FLS in accountability framework, policies, procedure. FLS should be incorporated into your organization's existing accountability framework, example, strategic plan, monitoring framework, operational plans. All those accountability frameworks should be integrated. The French FLS should be integrated in this. You may also need to adapt existing, implementing new policies relating to human resources, customer service, and communication. And also, you should have basic policy to set principles for the organization. For example, you can provide good quality service in both languages to all clients. And speaking about good quality, it's about also offering culturally and linguistically appropriate service to your Francophone and your bilingual clients. French and English resources published at the same time, at the same quality, identify language of preference for your client. For example, you should asking for the identification of your client. What is your mother tongue, for example? Which official language do you prefer to receive service in? That's a two simple questions that you can start asking your client. Communications. So it's critical to think strategically about what, how, and when to communicate in French. This is just an example that you saw, the Gantt chart that we see in your screen, to show that you can start small and build over time. And that's the same for all the other aspects of your plan. So, for example, the first year, you can start with the signage, the verse mail. Consider what you should publish in French for the general public after. Your clients, your staff, and partners in all of your communication material, including your website. Signage, name for your project in French and English. Organization name in French and English. Signage in front office, that service available in both language. Web page, you can have just a first page, one page in French that lists French program that you offer. Expand over time to a full French website. Form, option in French. Pour le service en français, appuyez sur 2, for example. Your social media, material, start small. Key message, start by the key messages. Then expand to more material over time as shown in this Gantt chart. Promotion. Promote that your offer, FLS. Communicate directly to your audience and to your partner organization. So, as you can see, you start and you try to build on over the years. So, you don't need to have all this at one go, but do it progressively. We can talk about FLS without talking about active offer. Active offer, which is a proactive approach, which is a regular and permanent offer of service to the Francophone community. It's about equity. FLS, one of the excellent member organizations, does a lot of work in this area. Active offer is respect. It's about respect of principle of equity. Active offer aims for service quality comparable to that provided in English. It's linguistically and culturally appropriate to the needs and priority of Francophone. It's inherent in the quality of the services provided to people, patients, residents, clients, and an important contributing factor to their safety. Equity, safety, quality are some keywords for active offer. Signage in both language, material in both language, website in both language, all those are components of active offer of service. Human resources, look at these pictures. In terms of human resources, clearly identify what position need to have French capacity and how much, because you don't have to have all your human resources speak French. That would be great, but at this stage, not really. Clearly identify our capacity you already have. Sometimes we don't know what we already have. Recruiting in both language service. Increase training for existing staff. Provide opportunity for staff to speak, work in French to increase, maintain French language service. In some organizations, they organize some French lunch, just to encourage staff to speak French, to speak each other in French. And you need also to check this resource that will show you how you can retain as well French speaking staff. As I said earlier, keep it simple. Now, When you have done the governance, a bit of your governance, your communication bit, and also your human resource bit, you need to evaluate what you have done. Evaluation is an important part of the plan. It's also a chance to identify what did we plan. What did we plan? Compare what did we do? What went well? What didn't went so well? What we can do differently? And adjust and plan for the next year. So it's keep it simple. It's about be realistic and adjust over time. So now we are lucky to have our colleague Tammy Schubert from OFIA who joined us. Tammy is going to talk a bit about OFIA journey from Anglophone organizations to one that delivers many services in French, and it's a leader in the field in that respect. Tammy, how are you with us?
Hello, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi, Tammy. Yep, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Super, thank you. So I wanted to take this opportunity to share a little bit about OFIA's experience in, as a traditionally Anglophone organization, moving into stronger provision of French language services. So for those of you on the line who aren't familiar with OFIA, we are one of the provincial subject associations for health and physical education. We operate heavily within the education sector, but we also make connections to public health and community health, primarily as they connect to schools. So the education sector is kind of our primary target audience. So that makes our situation a little bit different and a little bit unique, but I think our process is likely applicable and transferable across a couple of different settings. So OFIA's path to French language services started, I'd say, about 8 to 9 years ago, and really was motivated primarily as a result of a series of inequities of resources and services that were available to the French language education sector. And so what OFIA did at that time was they actually partnered and worked quite heavily with Health Nexus to come up with a 5-year plan for French language services that had some really achievable goals. And so, we did work in all of the areas that were kind of outlined within this presentation, but we kind of bit off a few pieces at a time, and we kind of started small at the beginning. And really one of the first things we did as an organization was we altered our development processes to include Francophone contributors. That was one of the greatest and easiest wins for us. And then from there, we sort of year over year, we really revised our planning and budgeting processes. So I think oftentimes organizations say, oh, we just can't afford to do it in French. Translation is really expensive. And I don't think it really always necessarily comes down to translation, but we sort of went back to the drawing board. We stopped sort of using our same work plans year over year, but we went back and thought about how could we rework this so that the process was reflective of all the clients that we wanted to serve. So who were we engaging? We were engaging Anglophone and Francophone educators in our processes, in our consultations, in our professional learning opportunities, and in our workshops. And so we, kind of took that and developed a plan for how we were going to get from point A to point B. So at first it might look like, we were maybe doing less in our work plans, but really what we were doing was working differently. In years 2 and 3, we put a really heavy focus on staffing and ensuring that we were recruiting and retaining French language staff. And I know that at times that can be a challenge for some organizations. But as roles were becoming available within the organization, we made it a priority to hire bilingual staff. And once we had secured bilingual staff, we ensured that their positions were sort of designated as bilingual positions, and we continued to fill them over time only with bilingual staff. So now on average we maintain probably about 5 Francophone staff within our organization at any given moment in time. Then we kind of ensured that we had some Francophones within our senior management team. So we had Francophones operating at various levels throughout the organization, and probably finally within our 5th year, and really probably more like the 6th year, we moved to including Francophones in our governance. So having Francophones on our board of directors. And that actually took us a little while to get buy-in at that level for the value of the Francophone voice, and we've since sort of designated that at a minimum there would always be at least one sort of designated Francophone position on our board of directors. We've kind of, over the last 8 to 10 years, had a series of really interesting and positive outcomes as a result of shifting our organizational culture and working in this way. Well, I'd say one of the greatest positive outcomes has been some of the rich relationships and partnerships that we've developed with a number of organizations, including Health Nexus, but also with the French language school boards across the province, and with a couple of Francophone education sector partners like Élargir l'Espace Francophone. Another one of our key learnings, I think, as an organization, which we deliberately reported back to our senior management team and to the board of directors around the benefits for the whole organization for having shifted our way of working in this way. Because we've later applied to the whole organization. So it was kind of like what we were finding out in working with Francophones was we were able to kind of use it as a bit of a petri dish and then translate that to the rest of the organization. So it's been a really, really positive experience for us. And I think that's all I have to share for now, unless people have questions.
That's fabulous, Tammy. Thanks.
Thanks, Tammy, experience.
Pleasure.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to open up the floor, as it were, the chat box at the very least, for some questions. And we've been having a great conversation on the chat box. Lots of comments from Melissa and others on some of the points that we've been talking about. And fortunately, some of the recommendations that we then went on to talk about later in the webinar. So that's really great. One of the points that I thought I would really mention, and Melissa had brought this up, is the role that non-French speakers can play in delivering French language services. And I think that that's two-pronged. One is that we can, even if we're not French speakers, we can be real powerful advocates for the provision of French language services. And I'm going to give an example of someone who worked at Health Nexus and was involved with HC Link for many years, Peggy Schultz, who retired just a few months ago. We still miss her. But she could say, I think, hello and goodbye and thank you in French. And that was as much as she could do. But she is one of the strongest advocates for French language services that I have met in my career to date. I remember a few years ago, before I started relearning French and getting really passionate about this topic, sitting in meetings with her, and she was just constantly raising her hand and saying, well, what about Francophones? What about French speakers? What are we doing in French? How are we incorporating the Francophone community? So it's really important to consider, for those of you on the phone who are Anglophones and might not be delivering services directly, what are some of the roles that you can play? And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that goes along with that is that even as an Anglophone, you can be involved in delivering French language services, not necessarily delivering the actual service itself, but certainly be involved as an advocate, be involved in the planning, be involved as a connector to the community, be involved in relationship building, be involved with all of those good, juicy things. So I think we've got a couple of hands up.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, we've got lots of questions.
And lots of questions. There's a question for Tammy about the number of Francophones working in Ophia. Oh, Tammy is responding. Okay, Tammy is already responding. And there is also Tarsis from the Toronto Central Line saying that Active Offer has a drive to conquer a seal of quality. So that's great. There are a lot of questions, and I see also.
Yes, Karen has her hand up.
Yeah.
Karen, I don't know if you want to use your voice to ask your question, or if you want to use the chat box. Does Karen need to unmute if she wants to use her voice by pressing *6? Okay. So Karen, if you'd like to use your voice, just press *6, or you can use the chat box.
Did that
Hi.
work?
Yeah, it works.
Hi.
Hi, Karen.
Okay, hi there. It's a question for Tammy, and I know I've asked this specifically of Andrea, just for the NRC here. If you can, maybe for Tammy's example, if she can dial it back over 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever OFIA started this process, do you recall what first simple, or do you have any suggestions for starting initially? And I do apologize because I did come in a bit late to the session.
I might just pop in there first, Tammy, if you don't mind, because we did talk about this at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm actually going to horn in on Tammy because I actually was working at OFIA before Tammy was, and I remember in my days there about, I don't know, 11 years ago or so, when we actually, by happenstance, was able to hire an assistant who was bilingual, and she at the time was an advocate and really kind of asking us to start to think about what we could do, and so at the time we started, and this is a piece of advice we give to organizations all of the time, is to start with a web page, to start with, to basically take a look at what existing resources and capacities you have and start from there and just continue to grow. So starting with a web page is a really great thing. Starting with partnership development and stakeholder engagement is a really great thing. I'm going to stop pretending my name is Tammy and let Tammy answer now.
No, that's, I think that's in essence what we did, Andrea. I think, like many organizations that are launching into doing work in French, I think there is a fear of, well, if we do a little bit but we can't do everything, does that look bad? And I actually don't think that's necessarily the case. I think, I think we probably did the same. We tried as much as possible to offer a few smaller resources where we could. We tried to, I think we did originally start with one French web page, and then it sort of eventually built over time. And I think part of the relationship building process with the Francophone community was to have something to offer and not always to ask them questions, as you said in the webinar, and to not deliver, but rather to, engage them in the development of some resources. And over time, as that continues to build, there's momentum. Positive relationships are developed, and you end up having something wonderful to offer them that they take ownership for and they've contributed to, so they actually believe in it. You're not just throwing a translation at them that they didn't know was coming and that they're not really interested in receiving and that may or may not even meet their needs. So I think, that was part of how we started, and we also, in part of the data that we had collected over the years, we did find that particularly within the Francophone educational community, there were inequities, there were gaps, there was a huge gap in terms of the types and number of resources that they were accessing to implement health and physical education. And so we were able to pull together a French-specific proposal to the Government of Ontario to help begin to address that inequity. So that specific French funding sort of helped us begin to close the gap. So we positioned it as an equity issue, and it was sort of seen that way.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Karen. So we've got lots of we've got so many questions. So Maria and Jeanette both have a fairly similar question, which is really about contacting partners, engaging with Francophone communities. And Jeanette's question is in relation to Kingston. There's a mobile population of French speakers who were involved with a military base and then move away. So how does one continue to offer French language services? How does one reach the community? How does one go about contacting partners? So I'm going to look at Patrick for this one.
There is an image that I used to use when I'm talking about active offer. It's the parking lot. The parking lot, when you go somewhere in a supermarket, let's say, and they don't know, or anywhere, they don't know how many disabled people they will receive. But there is always a spot consecrated, uh, dedicated, that's the word, dedicated for the disabled people, the people with disability. They will find a spot for them. So active offer, offering service, FLS service, it's not about numbers, it's about availability of the service. It's about equity. It's about being in a place, being there for people when they need it, they find it. So that's the way, if we look at it with equity lens, is the way to see it. I don't know, Andrea, if you have something else to add.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah. And yeah, it, yeah, that's okay for the beginner guide to engage in Francophone. Yep. And any other person can add a comment as well. Could-
Yeah, I think in terms of Maria's question about really reaching out to the Francophone community, Melissa's just building on that, is to find out if there are Francophone roundtables in your community. So really a lot of what we're talking about isn't stuff that you necessarily need to do or invent or start doing. A lot of times you can really work with your partners, as Patrick was saying earlier, to really find out what they're doing, who they know, what kinds of documents and procedures and avenues that they already have in place that you can build on.
Yes. And again, yeah, partner, and
Yeah.
Melissa is talking about, is writing about Francophone roundtable. Yeah, there is plenty where you can find Francophone. And yeah. And sometimes it's not even Francophone. You can have an Anglophone champion.
Yeah.
You will help you. Francophile or Anglophone can help you.
Right. So it looks like our questions are slowing down. So shall we move on? Did anyone have any closing thoughts? Jeanette is in Kingston. Okay, great. So just wanted to remind everyone that we're here at HC Link to help you not only with planning French language services and reaching out to Francophone communities, but also in a whole variety of different topics. And we'd encourage you to go to our website, and you can also find under the Consulting Services tab, you can request a service. And that's for folks like Patrick and myself and the 15 or so other HC Link consultants that can help to work with you. And we hope that you will connect with us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear how you've been able to apply some of this information in your webinar and some of your successes. And we'd also like to help you out in any way that we can. So just a couple reminders.